Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I start almost every show by saying we have an interesting guest today. And every week we do have interesting guests. We've run the gamut really from the far left to the far right. We've interviewed Bobby Kennedy. We've interviewed Roger Stone half a dozen times. Dershowitz the same, a U.S. Senator, whatever. So we've tried to vary the subjects, staying away from one particular thing. Although there seems to be a real emphasis right now on the constitutional issue of basically free speech. And so as our guest today, we are really honored to have Liz Flynt, who is the widow of Larry Flynt, the chairwoman of Hustler magazine and a variety of other enterprises. In fact, we were talking about one of them off camera. My former partner rents space in one of Larry Flynt's buildings. So I guess it's kind of like a small world. So anyway, welcome, Liz. Tell us a little about who you are and what you do and what you're planning to do.
Well, thank you very much. I'm honored to be on your podcast, and thank you so much. I'm Liz Flynt, and I was married to Larry for 24 years. And together for over 30 years, I met Larry in 1991, and I was his nurse, RN. And then he had asked me out a year after working for him, and I declined. But then a few years went on, and he asked me out to dinner, and I said, if you want to ask me out, I think you should come to my home. I lived in Alhambra. I grew up in the San Gabriel Valley. And Larry came over for dinner and met my mother and my stepfather and my older sister and a friend and my niece. And we all had dinner. And I prepared a beautiful meal, prime rib, mashed potatoes and gravy and green beans and dessert. And he came over and brought flowers for my mother, sister, and myself, and a bottle of wine. He didn't overstay his welcome, but he was a perfect guest and gentleman. And then from there on, the rest is history.
Literally, it's history.
Yes.
You know, Hustler was one of the original publications, and in a very broad way presented to the public a lot of things that they had not seen before. Maybe because part of it was the old conservatism, which limited a lot of expression. And we're going to talk about that because I understand that you are very active in the ACLU. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But first, I want to tell everybody about what I got in my hand here. This is a book that you've written.
Yes.
You can probably see it there. It's
Yes.
really very, very good. Very factual, informative, historical. And you're dealing with an interesting subject that not a lot of people talked about until actually most recently. And I just kind of wanted to read the quote from the back cover. And I went through the book. I didn't read word for word, but go through it. It says here, quote, "I would like to see an end to all obscenity laws in my lifetime. I don't know if that will happen, but it's my goal. If I can leave any kind of legacy at all, it will be that I helped expand the parameters of free speech," end quote. And it's attributed to Larry Flynt. Do you think that fairly well activates the thought process as to what Larry was intending to do?
Absolutely. It wasn't until Larry was in a courtroom and faced being sentenced 25 years in jail that it made him really become embroiled in this free speech. Obscenity trial in 1977 in Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio. And that's when Larry started to think of all the possibilities of what could happen. And from that day, he started to become very, very embroiled in this free speech and also to become an activist. And he did. And a lot of people thought that sometimes he hid behind the First Amendment, and that wasn't the case. Larry was out there in the front line, putting out fires and always becoming involved where there were issues. And what was concerning is that Larry always felt that we could no longer take free speech for granted. And to this day, in real life, it has become a problem. We are talking about obscenity now, being self-centered. I'm sorry, being censorship. Companies are self-censoring themselves. It's not so much a cancel culture. It's become a constitutional crisis right now.
As I mentioned to you earlier, there's a real movement now in that subject matter, depending on what part of the country you're living in. And ultimately, it's going to be decided by the Supreme Court. It's heading there. It's got to be ending up there. It's really a balancing act, is what the legislation has shown, as well as the court opinions. It's, is it really obscene? Is it really free speech? Is it inciting violence? Is it violate the First Amendment? Those are issues that are being bandied around all across the country. So we will probably see within this term a final decision from the U.S. Supreme Court. How do you think that's going?
Oh, we're headed in that direction and right now, because this young generation, they say, when you ask someone, what's your opinion on free speech? And they'll say, well, it's like hate speech. You shouldn't be able to say something and make it, meaningful. But I always say free speech is about the ideas. And also, it's not for the idea you love, but for the idea you hate the most. Free speech covers all, including hate speech. And but where there's harm, that's when you have to be careful, because, like you said, if you're inciting war, or you're inciting a protest where you're going to hurt somebody, or there's the problem right there. And this new generation has to be informed, educated, and also I feel that they're not as knowledgeable on what. And I always feel that the First Amendment is the cornerstone of our democracy. It gets its vitality and meaning from the unrestricted right of free choice.
Looks like we got disconnected there for a minute. Yeah, technical difficulty. Anyway, I don't know where you stopped, but
you asked me a question and then I responded, and I didn't even know we were having a difficulty.
All of a sudden, I was looking at a blank screen. I knew something was going wrong. And since I'm not a mechanical type person, there's no way except to start over, which is what I did.
Okay.
But I wanted to mention to you, because we're talking about a lot of legal issues here, constitutional issues, of course. There's a case, if the public really is interested, and I recommend it because it's very all-encompassing. There's a case called Brandenburg versus Ohio. And that case involved the right of a group, the Ku Klux Klan, as I recall, to march in Skokie, Illinois, and say a lot of anti-Semitic things during that march. And there was an effort to stop them from doing that. And it's kind of interesting that the Klan was represented by a Jewish lawyer, and I thought that was kind of interesting. He's been a guest on my show, so I know that he was involved in that. But the bottom line was, the United States Supreme Court said, you don't have to like what they're saying, you don't have to believe what they're saying or whatever, but they have the right to say it. And they tended to draw the line between what's permitted and what's not permitted. How do you see the dividing line between what you can and cannot say?
Well, freedom of speech is not for the idea you love, but for the idea you hate the most. So therefore, you can protest, assemble, but where there's harm, that is where you're not protected under the First Amendment. The First Amendment is the cornerstone of our democracy. And I feel that it gets its vitality and meaning from the unrestricted right of free choice.
Okay. What about symbols? You think it's okay for people to be marching with swastikas and things of that nature? Think that's
I don't
okay?
support it. I don't support it, and I'm against it. But they have that right to protest and assemble, and it's where there is harm.
Well, don't you think harm results from disseminating that kind of speech?
It can.
So do you think
And
there's
it has.
you think there's a bright line anywhere?
Yes.
Where do you see it?
Well, we've seen it happen in the past, and not so long ago, here in Los Angeles, a month ago, when ICE showed up downtown LA, removing people off the street and arresting supposedly illegal or people that were not documented to be here. But it doesn't mean you can beat them and harm them and hurt them and make them bleed. And not, I'm against that. But we have the right to protest and assemble. That is part of the First Amendment.
Well, what if hypothetically a group protesting does really foment an aura of hate crime, so to speak?
Then you're not protected under the First Amendment.
But how is it enforced? Who's going to come in and enforce it and say, you can't say the things you're saying? Is there a mechanism for that?
Well, that we need, and this is where my support comes in with, I've been a card-carrying member of the ACLU since 1995. And the ACLU, it is an organization that fights in the courtroom. They are representing people and it's an organization that defends people's rights in the courtroom. Public counsel, which I've been a member in the last 10 years, is they're a voice, and they provide legal services for people that do not have the resources. I think that those organizations are boots on the ground. They are assisting and they're helping and they're making waves. But we always sometimes have to use our legal system to get results.
Well, there's no question about making waves. I mean, the ACLU has been criticized by conservative groups forever, since its inception. And they've represented people on very unpopular causes. And they've taken a lot of criticism because of it. So what do you think they've accomplished in the time that you've been with them?
I think they've accomplished a lot. They've been able to support causes. For example, a lot of minorities here in our country, and also people that are being discriminated. They've been able to really accomplish a lot. Anthony Romero, who heads up the ACLU nationally, really has made a lot of progress.
Progress in what regard? I mean, legislation, the court opinions, or the public opinion?
I'd say both. Boy, this is a country that not everybody's going to agree on everything, and it's okay. That's what this country is made of. Different opinions.
Okay, I accept that as a basic premise for sure.
Mhm.
Let's go back to Hustler. Tell
Okay.
us, I'm sure this is a very interesting story. I don't know what it is, but I think it's going to be interesting. How did
Mhm.
it get started? Hustler magazine was among the first that would actually publicize
Mhm.
things that other people consider to be pornography. So,
The
what?
inspiration, Larry was inspired by Hugh Hefner. And his opinion, because I asked Larry one time, I said, where did this inspiration come from? He said, Hugh Hefner. He said, where credit is due and credit will be given to. He said, back in the day, Hugh Hefner was fighting the First Amendment fight back in the 60s. And so then Penthouse comes around. And then Larry publishes his first magazine in July of 1974. And it wasn't till a year later in 1975, the Jackie O edition, where he published nude photos of our former First Lady, Jackie O, in Greece, off the coast of Mykonos. And he went to print 3 times, and that's when he made his first million.
Well, he's certainly done a lot. He did a lot
Yes.
from that point forward. So there really were at that time 3, I suppose you could say, liberal type publications. There was Playboy, there was Penthouse, and there was Hustler.
Yes.
Was that pretty much the entire market?
Yes, well, there were other men's sophisticate magazines, but those were the 3 that really were popular and top sellers.
How were they different?
Well, I would say Penthouse had their photo sets had that glossy kind of look, and Playboy was all about the interviews and the stories, and just trying to who had the best stereo, and celebrity interviews and their photo sets. But Hustler, what made Hustler so different from the other 2 competitors was the pink shot, and that's why Larry got this so much. It was just too graphic for people.
Would you describe what you mean by that term?
Well, it was the centerfold.
But the others were doing those too, weren't they?
Yeah, but they weren't as graphic.
Okay, yeah. I was
It
trying
was
to
the
think of
style.
an appropriate word for that, but
Yeah, I'm
and
just trying to be
well, and
selective with my choices of words.
and this and there is some of that in your book because I
Mhm.
read through it. So that was, you say, that was the distinguishing factor, huh?
Yes.
And how did it do after the first year?
After the Jackie O issue in it was July of '85. It really put the magazine on the map nationally, and so Larry was very much in the news, and then when Simon Lease, the prosecutor in Cincinnati, Ohio, he wasn't a big fan of Larry Flynt, and he was charged Larry and Jimmy Flynt and Althea Flynt of obscenity, organized crime.
Okay, we use the word obscenity. In fact, it's used in lots of different
Mhm,
cases and legislation.
mhm.
What's your definition of obscenity?
Well, obscenity. Interesting. Obscenity, it also could be a legal word too. What's
Yeah.
obscene? And
Oh, it's defined. There's
mhm,
certainly, in fact, there's an interesting. I can't exactly quoted, so I'll paraphrase it. One justice was asked about what was obscenity, and his comment was, "I don't know, but I know it when I see it."
There you
And
go. Hmm.
that's so far that's the closest I've gotten to finding a very specific definition. But
Hmm.
it also borders on something called the right of privacy. And I know in the beginning it may have been harder to get distribution of magazines and whatever if they contained any grossly scenes, nudity and whatever. And I direct the audience because it's kind of like a lawyer show too.
Hmm.
And the case is called Griswold versus Connecticut, and it involved the use of contraceptive in a private home. And the law in Connecticut at that time was you couldn't do that. And the Supreme Court, again, the United States Supreme Court, held that what goes on in the bedroom is your business, and the government has no right to regulate it. In other words, you have the right of privacy. I don't think any right of privacy exists too much anymore because
Hmm.
there's cameras everywhere and everything's recorded and
Hmm.
everybody knows.
Facebook.
The whole thing. I think it reminds me of a book which I've read now 3 times. The book by George Orwell called 1984. I recommend that to anybody who wants to see where we are politically today and where we might be going or are going.
Hmm.
And this book was
Well,
written years ago.
well, Carol Ann Kennedy wrote a book on privacy, and she interviewed Larry. I think it was in '94 for one of her chapters.
I'm going to ask this question. I know it's probably pretty sensitive, but at one point, somebody shot Larry.
Yes.
When did that happen and why, to your understanding?
Hmm. Well, Larry was shot in Lawrenceville, Georgia, in March 6, 1978. And Larry went down there to prove a point. He he rented a kiosk to sell his magazine, and then he was arrested. And then, so fast forward, he's going to court down in Lawrenceville, Georgia, and Gwinnett County, and he is coming out of the court with his local counsel and another lawyer, and he is shot on the steps of the court, and was taken to a local community hospital, and then eventually he was airlifted to a hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, and it was a huge teaching hospital. And at that time, Larry was paralyzed because it went through his spine, and he was paralyzed. He was there for at least 6 months before he went back to Columbus, Ohio. And it was hard for him. I mean, how do you really look at yourself as you're not the same? And he tried all therapies and all remedies, and nothing worked. And until he went to Duke University and met a neurosurgeon, Dr. Blaine Nashhold, and he had pioneered this surgery called the DRES, dorsal root entry zone. And Larry had 5 of those surgeries. And I was with him for the last 2, and it took away all the pain. And because he was in pain for a lot, I'd say about since he was shot up until 1994. And he was on a lot of pain medication. And people have read through the course of his going, before going to the Supreme Court, he went through many different legal battles, and he was acting out in court and, just not really being himself, and being diagnosed as manic depressive, and, just many, just went through a lot, a different phase.
Did it affect his business enterprises, his business activity?
Well, no. He was very fortunate. I think the only time Larry was worried, uh, at one point, he told me, is when after he lost at the trial level with the Reverend Jerry Falwell in Roanoke, Virginia, when Jerry Falwell was awarded $200,000 for basically hurting his feelings. But Larry thought it would have been worse, that maybe he was going to wipe out the company. So it didn't happen that way. But the inspiration there was Larry filed a petition to the U.S. Supreme Court. And that's a very, very famous case that's taught in law schools all over the country, Falwell v. Flynt. And it changed the landscape. And Larry winning 8-0 made Larry's case winning made that parody and satire was protected speech. So you can say something on a David Letterman or Jay Leno and not hurt anybody's feelings, and we're protected.
Well, there's a famous case on that too, called Sullivan versus the New York Times. In case anybody's interested, there's a very good discussion in that case I read many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the name of the title of the case that went to the Supreme Court that you just mentioned? Was it?
Well, it's Falwell v. Flynt, and it was a satire.
The law of defamation, which a lot centers, of course, around the First Amendment.
Right.
The law of defamation, including the reference in Times versus Sullivan, or Sullivan versus the Times, I can't remember which one came first.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that a lot of these cases have established principles, and one of them dealt with the subjects that Larry was addressing during his productive lifetime. But at the end of the day, how was he mentally?
Well, it all started in 83. Larry, in the magazine, they used to have a section where they had satire, cartoons, and it was an ad, a Campari ad, that back in the early 80s, it started, it was an ad agency in New York would put out these first time on the Campari ad, and it was celebrities talking about their first time. So with Hustler, they put out this ad, a Campari, and at the bottom it said not to be taken seriously. And so Larry used the Reverend Falwell. He was a televangelist. And it said that he had sex with his mother in an outhouse. Anyhow, so Jerry Falwell filed a lawsuit against Larry, and his attorney was Norman Roy Grutman. Originally, he found this attorney because he had represented Penthouse. So he sues Larry, and then Larry loses at the trial level. And then obviously it's such a process, and then Larry loses, files, and goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court hears they receive thousands of cases every year. And when they decided to hear Larry's case, it was a good thing for Larry, because it was the final pivoting point where, was Larry going to win this or lose this? But, Larry thought, well, the preacher versus the pornographer. And Larry almost thought, well, this is my last chance, and I'm going to see what happens. But Larry prevails. Shockingly, it was February, I think it was February in 1988, when his lawyer made him aware that they won. It was a shock to Larry. He wasn't expecting to win this case. But Chief Justice Rehnquist wrote the majority opinion, and it was only 8-0 because at the time, Justice Lewis Powell had stepped down, and Reagan was trying to nominate other judges, for the spot. But, of course, they were all getting not being confirmed. Like there was one that smoked a joint. What was his name?
You're not talking about Bork.
Yeah, Bork. He didn't get in. And then there was another one.
Hainsworth.
Yeah, and then Kennedy got in. Justice Kennedy. So that's why it was 8-0.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the holding was parody is okay?
Mm-hmm. So because it was a parody, it wasn't not to be taken serious. And
It's hard to unring the bell, frankly.
in the history of the Supreme Court, not usually it's a very quiet, somber, very, nobody laughs. And then during that case, Larry said they got two big outbursts, the Justice Rehnquist and Scalia, because Alan Isaacman, who was Larry's attorney at the time, just talked about two different things. One was about George Washington leading a donkey, and he used the word ass, and they started laughing. So it was Larry said he was just, it was, he said he was like a dream. He was just there in awe. You're in this gallery and you can't believe you're there, and you're witnessing all this happen. And
it's
wow.
It's a dramatic feeling.
Yes.
When I was practicing full time, I argued a case before the California Supreme Court. It's the Supreme Court, the highest court of the state, and it is awesome to stand there in front of those 7 justices. Then they still are, and to be able to be in that room with those people, it's a once in a lifetime feeling. Absolutely, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And we won unanimously, also 7-0, which changed the law in California, by the way, dealing with insurance, what they call bad faith. So that was an exciting moment for me.
Congratulations. That's milestone.
People always say, what was the most important case or whatever? And it took me 13 years from beginning to end until we got the final ruling from the Supreme Court in our favor. So sometimes the process takes a long time. But I want to just quote a couple of things that I read about Larry and were attributable to him.
Mm-hmm.
One was that he had a goal to, quote, challenge authority, end quote. Can you tell us a little about what was meant by that?
Yeah. Well, Larry always, he said when he was young, he was always told that you should always challenge authority. And so he did his adult life. And even in business, Larry was the type of guy that always thought everything out. And he's always asking questions. But if he felt very strong about something or strong about his convictions on anything, he would always follow through. And that's what made Larry so interesting and just a real leader. And there'll never be anyone like him.
Do you think the challenge played a role in his starting Hustler magazine?
Yes.
Because that certainly was defying authority at the time.
Yeah, because they said it's very hard to start up a magazine. And also, he says, Liz, he says, you only have one shot. And you have to be right on with your ideas and your concepts. And he was very goal oriented. He knew what he wanted, and no one was going to stop him.
The second comment, another quote, is, quote, he had a passion to defend free expression.
Interesting.
What does that mean to you?
Free expression. Well, free expression is all about the idea. It's all about the idea that you have. So, for example, like I said earlier, free speech is not for the idea that you love, but for the idea you hate the most. So, in today's world right now, I feel that free speech is being suppressed. And we need more people to be more aware of what this means and not to be afraid of speaking out. And people say, well, how do I get my ideas known? Well, you can write a guest essay in your local newspaper or the New York Times, LA Times. They're very selective who they pick. And you can go to your local congressman or go to a rally. Social media. But you have to be passionate about something. We can't take free speech for granted.
So I guess the conclusion really is, I know it's an opinion, but it certainly is one that is based on fact and history. Where do you think we're going on this free speech issue now? Where do you think it's going to end up?
Well, first of all, it's going to end up in the court, and whatever, whoever decides, right now we have such a conservative court right now. It's concerning. And like I said, we are in a constitutional crisis right now.
Constitutional crisis in what way?
Well, because of, for example, this new administration is trying to silence us.
Okay. Give me an example if you can.
Well, our ideas. For example, free speech. People are out there protesting. Well, they're arresting people left and right.
Okay, so are you optimistic or pessimistic, or neither?
I'm very optimistic.
Why is that?
Well, I try to stay hopeful. We're living this is the country, freest country in the world. I mean, how can we it's like turning back the clock. Like right now, the First Amendment is really a concern because we feel that they're just slowly chipping away at our rights. And they're getting very close.
I guess the real closing question is, what can you or other people do about it if your assumption is correct?
Well, for example, if you're not happy with your local politicians, your congressmen, senators, and vote them out.
You really think
take some leadership and show up? Just like in Australia, if you don't vote, you could be fined. Over here, I mean, if you're a convicted felon or whatever, you lose. Sometimes you can lose that right to vote. This is a country where it's a privilege, not a right.
All right. Anyway, it's been very interesting. I've always wanted to know. And actually, I took UF this deposition one time. He was a nice guy. And story for another day, of course. But the reality is, we have a long history of the subject of free speech, the right of privacy, obscenity, and all the rest of it. There are bodies of it. There must be hundreds, if not thousands, of books on the First Amendment. And even though it's only like 7 lines long, it really consists of basic freedoms for all of us. And I recommend people to just pick it up, just read the first 10, which is the original Constitution, and the amendments, I think we're 25. And you'll learn a whole lot about where we're going and what we've done, and a little bit about our history at the same time. So anyway, I wanted to thank you
This
very
is
much.
what I keep on my desk.
I
It
can't
is so
read it.
important. And, you know, people, if you're not familiar, this is the Constitution of the United States of America. And I keep this on my desk every day next to my calendar because I love this country. And I wish more people would read the amendments. I wish people could cite them.
They really should, you know. But there's so many commentaries on it. Remember, it was written in 1789 by a bunch of basic white farmers, and a lot of things have evolved. That's why we have two basic views toward the Constitution. There are those who are want strict liberal interpretation, and you can't define or do anything with the actual words. And the others are that it grows as we grow and changes as we change. And that view is expressed by many people today as well. But we haven't decided which way we're going to go with this. Every Supreme Court is different. Some are more conservative, some are more liberal, and we're seeing changes. So you were very informative today. I thank you very much. I am going to read some of the things in your book.
Thank you. Well, I'm very proud of it. And Woody Harrelson wrote the foreword. He played Larry in The People versus Larry Flynt. And, one time I asked my husband, Larry, how would you like to be remembered? And he said, Liz, for expanding the parameters of free speech.
Good. Great, noble goal. Thanks again, Liz.
Thank you, Judge Soto. It was an honor and a pleasure, and I thank you so much for the opportunity.
Okay, our pleasure. See you again.
Bye.